I'm Travis Frame, and this is Frame by Frame, and today will be the second episode of my Depression Trilogy analysis. So to start off, there is a major spoiler for Antichrist, moderate to major spoilers for Melancholia, and mild to moderate spoilers for Nymphomaniac. Just so that's out of the way. You've been warned if you haven't seen those or if you care about them being spoiled. I want to let you know now. So this video will be about the defining aspects of each of the films in the Depression Trilogy. In this video, I will discuss some of the key aspects that give each of the films their defining nature, their defining thing. Now, these aren't necessarily the things that stand out the most about the film or the things that someone else might find to be the key elements, but they're the key elements that I chose that I think contribute a lot to the film as a whole. I feel like many filmmakers can choose to do something that is different from the other aspects of the film in order to elevate the film as a whole. So each of the elements that I'm going to be talking about are different from other parts of the film, but I feel like are a key element in making the film what it is. I want to talk about the key elements and I think that in this format and in this way, these key elements are essential in the form and composition of the movies as a whole. I will also talk about each film individually and then bring the theory elements together at the end. For the key characteristic of the first film in the series, Antichrist, I consider a defining characteristic of the film to be the differences between the prologue and epilogue chapters from the rest. The immediate difference that anyone will be able to see simply from seeing screenshots of these chapters, as opposed to the middle chapter of the film, is that the prologue and epilogue are shot in black and white, as opposed to the color filming of the rest. These segments are also filmed in slow motion, as opposed to the majority of the rest of the film, which is filmed in a normal way. Many may immediately dismiss this decision and say that Lars von Trier is simply being pretentious and trying to glorify the horrific aspects of the film. I don't think that, again, I don't think the movies are bad. I think they're amazing. I wouldn't be talking about it if they weren't. I think the black and white is meant to connect to the aspects of depression of the film and kind of form what von Trier is trying to communicate. I think the prologue takes place before any of the horrific aspects of the film, and it appears oddly beautiful due to the gorgeous black and white cinematography by Anthony Dodd Mantle. Despite the very graphic subject matter of he and she having sex, the intro into the film represents the time of the film in which the characters are at their most vulnerable, they're most at peace with the world around them. But this slowly fades in the scene, and it becomes quite horrific as the tension rises as you watch the couple's son slowly move towards the open window. The slow motion aspect of the film increases the tension, makes the viewer plead that the couple realize what is happening and hope that they're able to stop it. The impending doom of this scene makes it heartbreaking and incredibly impactful. And in a similar way, the epilogue uses the black and white cinematography and the slow motion in a similar effect. It follows he as he walks away from the cabin that the couple were staying at. It follows him after the death of his wife. He stands atop the hill after he murders his wife. And he's rushed by hundreds of women, all filmed in a similar black and white slow motion style. Throughout the epilogue, he looks fairly relaxed despite the horrific elements that took place prior to that in all of the prior chapters and just the kind of monstrosities that happened in the early parts of the film. This is what I believe makes the prologue and epilogue so significant. Each chapter represents the only time in the entire film when he feels at peace and is able to cope. For those of you that don't know, the characters are not named, so I refer to them as he and she as they're labeled on IMDb because they're not named throughout the course of the film. In the middle chapters of the book, both he and she struggle to cope with their feelings of loss, which I will talk about more in the next video. The very beginning and the end of the film were shot differently because of the different ways in which the characters feel. At the beginning, he is completely fine as disaster and loss has yet to impact him. And at the end, he feels acceptance about the loss of his family. The women that rush him at the end are representative of the demons that he has for his own actions, and as his decisions and choices resulted in the death of two people that he cared the most about. His standing there is both an admission of guilt, but also him coming to terms with the fact that he will have to live with what has happened. I feel like as a result of the black and white cinematography to show this, And the slow motion, it's a stylistic element that's completely justified and helps differentiate those segments of the film. Moving on to the second film in the trilogy, Melancholia, I also want to talk about the beginning of the film. The first few minutes of the film are incredibly stylized and use a very similar extreme slow motion in order to convey its ideas. And again, some people are like, oh, it's just slow motion for pretentious. It's kind of the same thing that people throw at Snyder. Slow motion is fun. Slow motion is cool. It can be used very, very well. And I think in this instance, it is. Same for Snyder. It's not a video about Snyder. It's not a video about slow motion, but I think that slow motion can be used so powerfully. The purpose of this initial scene is that it more or less lays out the plot of the rest of the movie. That's why I mentioned the spoilers, both with the shots that mirror later scenes in the film or that they represent them more symbolically. The reason for this is key to understanding the deeper themes of the movie. The movie as a whole is about feeling hopelessness, as well as the impending doom, which I will also talk more about in the next episode. Many may question von Trier's decision to essentially spoil his movie from the very start, but there's a clear reason for this series of shots. The sequence could have been placed at the very end and still served the purpose of being an absolutely gorgeous sequence, but the reason for it being at the beginning is far more meaningful. Von Trier wants the viewer to know the aspects of the film that are coming, or at least the themes, the ideas, the concepts. This is essential to his idea of impending doom and hopelessness. You know what's going to happen, and you're powerless to stop it. The viewer knows to some extent many of the elements about what they're about to see, but you can't do anything about it. They know that from the start, the world will end, and it leaves the viewer wanting and waiting and watching as the characters are helpless to do anything about their inevitable destruction. This adds that sense of melancholy that the film is trying to convey and why this aspect of the film is so important to the overall message and impact. It's making you feel like the character feels. And so while it feels like something that is tacked on, it's not. It's intentional, it's purposeful, and it adds a lot to the film. And I think it's an incredibly key element of the film. The final film in the trilogy is also the longest and the most different from the other two, at least to me personally. Nymphomaniac has a very different approach to representing some of the deeper themes that Antichrist and Melancholia do. And I think the key communicating aspect of Nymphomaniac is also far more straightforward than those of the prior ones discussed. Throughout the film, there is the extended conversations between our protagonist, Joe, and the stranger that she meets, Seligman. Through these discussions, there are incredibly in-depth and these deep conversations on depression and aspects of life in general. As opposed to the way that the scenes are shot like in Melancholia or Antichrist, the conversation scenes in Nymphomaniac are stylized in a way that they were written by von Trier. The dialogue is the stylized element. And the way that they flash between like diagrams or alternate images mid-discussion is how he creates this method of communication. The dialogue between the two of them is incredibly sophisticated and does not sound quite like dialogue you would expect to occur between people that have just met, despite the fact that he saved her at the beginning of the film, and they are complete strangers. The interaction could easily have been incredibly forced and odd, and while at times is intentionally awkward, it works. It makes sense that it's awkward. These people do not know each other. They're telling each other these very personal, deep stories and debating about really complex subject matters. These parts of the film contribute to the overall commentary that the film is trying to convey to the viewer. And I think this is by far the most direct statement of views, as each character will often outright say what they believe regarding a certain situation. This defines the film and differentiates from the others, while still having an interesting way of communicating the message of the movie, while being able to contrast the ideas with the rest of the story that Joe and Seligman are telling. The juxtaposition of the story and the commentary is one of the elevating factors of this particular film. And obviously one of the things that people point out with Nymphomaniac is the graphic sexual content of the movie. And while that's present, it is significantly less than the actual conversation and elements of the movie. These elements are far, far more important and impactful, and they work with those other scenes in a way to better understand the fractured nature of Joe's psyche. And that's why I think that it's such a key element of the film, is that people shouldn't look at this movie as a movie that has just graphic subject matter. And while it does, it also has so much more to offer, because being a 5 hour and 22-minute film with the director's cut version, there's a lot more than just sexual content in the movie. It's such a small portion of a much, much bigger, more complex narrative. And finally, the three films are vastly different, obviously, in how they approach and how they communicate these deeper themes. This is one of the major aspects of the trilogy that differentiates from each other. These movies have different ways in which they present ideas. The films started out more metaphorical with Antichrist and ended with the most direct and straightforward with Nymphomaniac. Melancholia exists somewhere in the middle, with both direct and clear aspects of depression being represented, as well as heavy symbolism in other aspects of the movie. And that's just how I interpret them. Some people might say Nymphomaniac is far more metaphorical and Antichrist is less. There's a lot of different ways to interpret these movies, and this is just my opinion. That's how the series is going to be. This is all my opinion. This is what I think, and you might think that the key elements of these films are different, but these are the ones that I chose to talk about, and I think that it helps to understand the films a little bit better when you understand the key points in which I'm basing a lot of my thought process on. So hope you like episode 2, and look forward to making episode 3 and sharing it with everyone. Thank you.